All right, so Kel Lash, so glad to have you here on ACIM Gather for A Course in Miracles. This mic is all yours.
Thank you, Lynn. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here again. I've been reading a book that maybe some people listening to this have read. It's called The Surrender Experiment, and it's by Michael Singer. And I know it's a pretty popular book in the spiritual communities and in course community. But I was recently recommended to read this book, and I actually had bought it on my Kindle like many months ago, probably like a year ago, maybe. And I never got around to reading it. I've been reading the course, and I actually have a really hard time reading any books other than the course these days. It's really hard for me to read a book that's not Course in Miracles. And I started reading this book because I got a ding to read it, and someone else had mentioned it, and it's really good. It is really good. And so I wanted to share a little, just a little part from this book at the kind of towards the beginning of this book, because it's kind of like, so the book is basically about Michael Singer. So Mickey, he's like an economics PhD student, and he is on like the fast track to like intellectual life and studying economics. He's like teaching at the university. He's like highly logical. He's not spiritual at all. Not interested in anything spiritual of nature. And like he has this like profound experience one day while meditating, and he begins to get like really obsessed with meditating, just like really into it, healthy obsessed, like really into it. And the whole book is just his journey of surrendering to, so he basically starts the journey by wondering one day. He starts observing the voice in his head. So he starts observing his ego, basically, and the thoughts that the ego is spewing out on him when he's just sitting, hanging out with a really good friend one day. And he's like, wow, like, have you ever heard this voice in your head and just like listen to this voice in your head? And they have a laugh about it. And then, the friend goes on with his life, and he's left wondering, like, this is like really something. Like, this voice is telling me these insane things constantly, and it never shuts up. So he goes on this, like, he starts observing the voice, basically. And he first starts, I don't think this is going to spoil the book for anyone, but he first starts going about these observations as like, he's observing them, but he also has in the back of his mind all the time, like, how do I get rid of this voice? How do I make this voice stop? I'm observing the thoughts neutrally, and he gets really good at it, and he becomes really at peace with it. But essentially he like gets stuck at some point because he realizes like he can't just kill off the voice, like he's missing something. And so he starts working with like accepting, like the idea of acceptance, basically. And I haven't actually read the whole book yet. I've read like the first third, and he's just kind of making this shift right now to noticing, oh, wait a minute, like I have to really he's basically starting to discover the forgiveness process, the self-forgiveness process, where we have to like observe the thoughts, but we have to give ourselves compassion with what those thoughts are and what the emotions we are having are from those thoughts. So obviously, if anyone listens to me a lot, they know that I talk about this a lot. So I love this book, and it's really fun to read. He's a funny guy. He really is guided. He's just like on this deeply guided journey, and I can't wait to finish the book. It's a really good, and it's a page turner, and it's not very long. And so anyway, he has this property, and he comes back to his property after a summer being gone. And he has this like friend that had shown up a while ago to meditate on his land. And the friend is a big meditator. This is in the 70s too. This is like the what do they call it? I'm too young. The age of awakening, or the age of higher consciousness, or they had like a name for like the 70s when everyone was like waking up and getting really into yoga. Like people were bringing yoga to the Western world, bringing alternative healing and energy healing, and like talking about metaphysics and all this stuff. And so this woman on his land is basically comes to the land and meditates, and she brings other people and they meditate. And he just like allows it all to happen while watching his ego voice. Like, I don't want to be around anyone. He's a total hermit. He's not interested in like interacting with the world or anything, which is also a really interesting part of the book, because like, as we know, we have to interact with the world. Like that's our template for learning. That's where our teachers are. Our ego is interacting and responding constantly to other people. So anyway, he comes back to his land one day, and he finds that this woman and his friend are decided to build a little house, a little cabin on his property while he was gone, without his permission. And he's like, so his ego starts talking about it. And so I wanted to read just like the little section about this, because I just think it's funny, and it paints such a perfect picture of how the ego can get so caught up in anything. And I was laughing when I was reading it, this part just last night, because for the last day and a half, my ego decided to go on a total rampage about ridiculous things, like things that just don't matter. And I think maybe the new moon and the Lionsgate portal we had yesterday on 8/8 maybe had something to do with it. Because I was doing okay. I was coasting. I was living my peaceful life. I've been really like hyper focused on doing this TEDx talk application. And I've been like, working hard and doing my thing, and just like feeling really happy, loving myself deeply, all the things. And then all of a sudden my ego is just like, it just starts going nuts. And so I wanted to share this part of the book here about his ego. So I'll just read this little bit. It's not very long. The title, the chapter, excuse me, it's from chapter 19 of The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. And the chapter is called Acceptance, Acceptance, and More Acceptance. So he says, my mind remained very peaceful during my drive across country, but I faced a serious challenge to my vow of acceptance the moment I arrived home. As I drove through the woods onto the interior field, instead of the characteristic silence, I heard the buzz of a circular saw. I then saw Sandy and my friend Bob Gould, donned in carpentry aprons and climbing on a structure they were building on my land. It was one of those rub your eyes in disbelief moments. I asked what was going on. Sandy cheerfully informed me that she was building a house, and Bob Gould had agreed to help her. I don't recall the demeanor of my voice, but I reminded her that this was my land on which she was building her house. Again, very cheerfully, Sandy replied that she was laying no claims to the house and it would be mine when she decided to leave. She obviously had worked it all out in her head and had no problem with it. I decided I'd better go home and meditate a bit before responding. So, and this is how he kind of, goes about life, which I love. So he goes on to say, imagine what that voice in my head was saying. Oh my God, how dare she make a decision like that without even asking me? I don't want another house on my land. I don't want anyone else staying out here. So why would I want another house? How in the world does someone make a decision to build a house on someone else's property without even asking them. And on it went. But by then I was well trained and just calmly observe all these thoughts being created by the preference-driven mind. After all, if I had wanted another house on the property, that voice would be saying, "What a miracle. God stepped in and started building me a second house without me having to do a single thing." To me, it didn't matter what that voice was saying. I knew to the core of my being that I was not going to give him the time of day, not to mention the run of my life. If I had a choice between using this real life situation to get my way or to free myself from being bound to my way, I would choose freedom every time. That was the essence of my experiment with life. If it's down to a matter of preference, life wins. So I went back up the hill, strapped on an apron, and helped them build Sandy's house. So then he goes on to, talk about how it was a wonderful experience building the house. And all of a sudden he has this little house that he originally actually had envisioned on the property. But when his friend Bob had helped him build the first house for himself, it ended up being this like fancier, bigger version of it, instead of this little rustic cabin with like no electricity or anything. And so he ended up getting that from life. And so his whole life is like this, like things keep happening. He just surrenders to it. Like people are like telling him to do things at the university, and he just is like, he doesn't want to do any of it. He doesn't want to be involved in the mainstream world anymore. He doesn't want to finish his dissertation. He doesn't want to do any of that stuff. But life keeps making these decisions on his behalf, and they turn into these like amazing, miraculous experiences that he's grateful for when he just shows up and like follows what he's guided to do, and like doesn't say no basically to anything. And so I just love that, because like that's exactly, and when he's talking about the ego, that's exactly how the ego operates. Like he talks a lot about preferences in this book, and I love how he talks about this voice, because it's like just constant preferences. So it's like, I prefer this to happen, and so if this doesn't happen, this thing that I prefer, I'm going to be upset about it. Like I'm going to be angry about it. I'm going to feel some way about it because I preferred this to happen. And so the preference actually turns into this like ultimatum or this expectation. And then it turns into a judgment about it when that doesn't happen. And so this is like how we operate every day, essentially, is it not? So, yeah, so this was kind of, my ego was having a rampage recently about my own preferences, and it wasn't even about like, it's not about important things. It's like roommate stuff. It's like, it's not like huge life altering decisions over here. And so, yeah, so I recommend this book. Yeah, it's so beautiful how he, this guy who's basically an atheist, makes this discovery within himself, his own mind, and then follows the guidance, and he basically is on this journey of following guidance deeply with acceptance and compassion, and like learning the process of observing his thoughts, accepting them, and like allowing life to choose for him. And it's a really cool thing to read about someone who's like really radically allowing life to choose for him. Like he literally, that's surrender experiment. He literally surrenders to every nuance, every part of his day day after day and follows these synchronicities, and he learns that like all these coincidences that keep happening, opportunities are actually like happening for a reason, that they're not coincidences. Like his whole outlook, his whole belief system changes as he wakes up to the truth. And actually one of the first things that he wrote, Michael Singer, was something titled something of truth, the discovery of truth or something, that he wrote a very long time ago. So that's what it is. He's waking up. He's waking up to the truth, and he's surrendering to the truth, and he's following the truth, which is not what he originally thought it was. And it continues to not be about his voice in his head. Like, that's not the truth. The voice in our head is not the truth. The ego voice has never been the truth and never ever will be the truth. But we get so attached to things in our lives and outcomes and situations that we make up this version that we think is the truth based on what the ego decides is going to be the truth for that day. So it's not a very accurate rule book we are following here. So yeah, self-acceptance is really a big part of this process. Is so we have to observe the thoughts that go on in our mind. And when my ego was on this rampage 2 nights ago. And last night, after about 24 hours of it, I was like, okay, I need to take a walk or something and like just observe these thoughts and move through them, get my body moving. And because usually I walk every day, but I hadn't walked yet the whole day because I was like, it's like I have to just like meditate on this. I have to sit around and like process this stuff and like write about it and think about it. But it wasn't that, again, that was me like trying to do specific things that I believed that I should do to work through these beliefs and these preferences that the ego was spewing out at me, making me angry and irritated and worried and so and so. And so I decided to take a walk late last night. And my ego starts going on and on about the thoughts, and oh my God, I can't believe she's doing this, and she's lying to me, and just all these things. And I started actually talking to the ego out loud, which usually, like, I do that a lot, but it's usually in my head that I respond to the ego. But the ego was being so obnoxious about it that I was like, okay, like I actually started talking to my ego out loud while I was walking. Like this was like 10:30 p.m. last night. And so I probably looked like the crazy person, which is great. I hope that I did. And I hope that someone watching me would be like, oh, I know what she's doing. She's talking to her ego. So I started having the conversation out loud about it. And I was like, okay, you obviously have a lot of things, a lot of opinions and judgments on this matter. Like, so just get them all out. So, okay, get them all out. And so I get them all out loud, and I respond. I'm like, okay, is that it? Are you done? Do you have more? And, I gave it a voice, like a more intentional voice, rather than just like having it operate, throughout the day, like we usually do. Like I was like really hooking into it and like listening to it, like I'd listen to my client. And so I'm listening to it. And so then I start responding to it, and I'm like, okay, I hear you. I hear you, but think about that. Like maybe you can chill and maybe this doesn't even matter. Because what you just told me, like, okay, if this scenario plays out, like you're assuming that this scenario might be playing out, what difference does it make if that scenario is what's happening versus this other scenario? So play that out. Okay, so this scenario happens. Who cares? What does it change? Like this literally has nothing to do with you. And that's true. It's not that, like, on a spiritual level, we know that nothing has to do with us when other people do things. Like it literally was a scenario that didn't have to do with any interaction I had with someone. Like it was like someone else's choices and scenario. So it literally had nothing to do with me. And that person's choices had absolutely nothing, no effect. Whatever choice that they were making had absolutely no impact on my life. Like it wasn't going to change my life. That was their journey. So whether they made what I believed was the worst, most terrible, unhealthiest choice for themselves versus the healthiest choice, it didn't matter. So there were like three major things that I thought might be going on, and no matter what choice they were making or they would continue to make, it literally didn't make a difference. So this is what I'm telling the ego out loud. I'm like, okay, if that's happening, it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter. It does not affect you. This is not your problem. And I did that with the other choice. I was like, okay, if they're doing this, again, this is not your problem. This doesn't change anything. This does not affect you. And I did it with the third scenario. And I was like, okay, now I'm getting somewhere. And I really, and I had to be really gentle and loving with myself. I couldn't be, maybe this works for some people, or maybe people believe this approach works for them, but I don't think it really does. That like tough love approach, like, okay, ego, just like get the F over it. Like, I don't care what you have to say anymore, which is true. Like I don't, but the thing is I don't want to care what you have to say anymore. But the truth is that I do care what you say. Obviously it's affecting me. I'm like walking around at 10:30 at night, irritated. So about something that has nothing to do with me. So it's just, I think there's a tendency for us to not be gentle with ourselves when we are going through this, and we're just like, oh my God, why are you thinking about that again? Why are you obsessing about that? Stop thinking about that. Who cares? And this is like how we talk to ourselves. And it's like we're trying to match the energy of the ego, the original ego voice, which is talking to us that way, right? In that harsh way. And so we have to like match the energy of it and talk back to it that way. But what that does is any guilt and shame and blame and judgment and attack that the ego had on us originally then gets matched and placed back on our ego with another form of the ego. And it's just matching that. And then so then what it does is then it gets more intense and it gets stronger. And the guilt and the blame, this is where it can sometimes turn into shame, because it gets stronger and then we're attacking our attack. So then not only are we feeling bad about the fact that we were dealing with this and we were having these big emotions from it, but now we're attacking ourselves further for having these big emotions of it and saying, I shouldn't be feeling this way. I already feel bad. And now I feel worse for feeling bad because I shouldn't be feeling this way. All these shoulds and shouldn'ts are going through, and always and nevers. All these are like extreme ways of thinking about things. The always, the nevers, the shoulds and shouldn'ts. Those are very attacking statements, and it's all separation. Has nothing to do, the ego, it's a separate voice. It has nothing to do with our oneness. It's our ego is, they're the private thoughts. They're not the oneness thoughts. They're not the universal thoughts of truth, which are thoughts of love, which is love. So ego is everything that's not that. So how do we actually transform that ego and actually make it stop? Well, we have to give it a voice and hear it out with love and compassion. We can't just attack it back. Okay, this is what the world does. We say, you're doing something wrong. And so I'm going to self-righteously tell you you're doing something wrong. I'm going to shame you about it over and over and over. And that's violent. That's violent communication, even if it's not like physical acts of violence. That is violent communication. It's violence. It's emotional abuse. It's verbal violence and abuse. And it's not how we solve these problems. So the solution is to come at the ego with love. Okay, we don't, ultimately, we don't want to acknowledge its existence because it's not real, but we can't get to that place by just attacking it and saying, you're not real, go away, I'm not going to listen to you. No, the ego is spewing out those thoughts constantly throughout your day because it needs to be heard. So we need to hear them and tune into them and actually observe them, like Michael Singer is doing in this book. And then look at them with compassion. And if we can do that, we are giving compassion to ourselves. So if we're having judgment, say the ego judgments are about other people, we might not be able to show compassion to those other people we're judging at first. And so the process has to start by, well, could I be willing to show compassion to myself for having these judgments? So I'm not ready. I might not be ready to show compassion to someone else that I'm judging for doing something I deem as wrong. But could I ask myself, am I willing to show compassion towards myself for having that judgment, and showing compassion to myself for not knowing how to let it go, or maybe not being willing to let that opinion go? Like, can I be willing to accept myself anyway, even while I'm having this judgment? And so you see how that process can start to really tone down, really turn the dial down on those ego thoughts. Because if I can say, okay, I don't know how to get rid of this, I don't know how to think of this person differently, I don't know how to see this situation differently, it's caused me so much pain. But if I can be willing to just show myself some compassion and acceptance and love, then that's all I need for this process to really get going. And this is a moment-to-moment process. This isn't a one and done thing. It's a process. It's, this is a course in miracles. It's not a one-time thing. So this is a constant process that we can be engaging in if we choose and whenever we choose. And when we don't choose to engage in it, it really doesn't matter, because the next moment we can choose to engage in it again in the process, and we can be willing to see something differently. So, in any situation, can I ask myself, okay, what is my belief here? What's the meaning I've made of this? What is the emotion that I feel? Because that emotion that I feel is only being felt because I made that meaning, period. So can I be willing to look at that and ask myself, okay, is this meaning really true? And before I do that, am I willing to accept that that's how I feel? Okay, so I'm not trying to push the emotion away. Am I willing to accept that's how I feel? Am I willing to feel into where I feel that in my body physically, where that emotion has latched onto? So for me, when I was going through this anger and irritability the last day and a half, it was all in my stomach. I was feeling crampy. My stomach was hurting. I was feeling nauseous. It's a very, very common experiences I get in my stomach, in my solar plexus, all the time. That's where I feel a lot of emotion, not just there, but that's one very loud place that my ego operates on the physical level in my body. So I really had to tune into that and work with the process of accepting that too. Because for me, I don't have much anxiety anymore. I used to have severe anxiety and PTSD, and I'd have panic attacks all the time. And I was really not very functional with my level of anxiety. And I don't have that anymore, but the way that it shows up for me, and maybe this is the way it shows up for anyone, some people listening, is especially if you're a sensitive person like myself, is I won't have like mental conscious anxiety anymore, but I might feel like nauseous in my stomach, in my belly. That happens a lot. I shouldn't say it happens a lot, but when it happens, a lot of the times when my anxiety manifests, it often manifests that way when it's there. So it's not like I'm feeling worried or nervous. It's just like my stomach is like feeling it for me, and the beliefs are unconscious. And so for me, that's an indicator. That's a red flag. That's my trigger for me to. That's the door in for me to recognize that, and then take that and look at that, and then kind of dissect and unpack, okay, there might be something that I am annoyed about or angry about or worried about that isn't conscious in this moment. But so that's like my way in. So everybody has their own kind of ways in. For someone else, it might be they get really hot in the face, or someone else, it might be they start getting really like jittery or restless, or for someone else it might be back pain or a headache or something. It can manifests all sorts of different ways for different people, and so that's an indicator. Our body is keeping score here with what's going on and what it's experiencing, and it's a doorway to the healing as well. So even though we are not bodies, and that this is an illusion, including our bodies, we need to work with our bodies. Our bodies are beautiful, wonderful vessels for telling us things that we need to look at. And so, and then the other level of The next level of working with this stuff after we've, worked on accepting how we feel and accepting the meaning we've made, is asking ourselves, is that meaning we made really true? Is that belief that the ego is telling me really true? So guess what? If that thought is giving us an unpleasant emotion, that thought, which is a belief, that belief is false. It's really that simple. It's not complicated. If we have an unpleasant emotion based on a belief, and that belief is false. It's not true. The only truth is love. So we have to ask ourselves that, and then be willing to identify what is that belief that we know is the truth, but we need to get there by thinking about it. Most people need to get to that end point by thinking about it by being willing to think about it as a belief, a new belief, a different belief that's the opposite or different than the original belief that was making us feel bad. So what is that new belief? And then we can begin to imagine, so if I was living my life with that belief, how would I feel? I would feel great, because that new belief would give me freedom. It would give me peace. I would feel happy. It's that simple. I would feel happy because that new belief is focused on who I am and who others are in the present, which is innocent and perfect. And God has forgiven us. God actually hasn't forgiven us, because God doesn't need to forgive us for anything. There's nothing we need to be forgiven for, but for our human mind to conceptualize that, we can say, for all intents and purposes, that God has forgiven us. So, yeah. And then, another step, another level of this work, this is like, the next course. First, it was like, self-forgiveness 101. And now like the 201 course is like looking at, so if I'm doing all that work that I was just talking about and I'm like still suffering, I really have to look at, what is my judgment that I have on someone else? So if I'm working with a judgment that I have on about someone else, what's really going on is I have that judgment about myself somehow, even if it doesn't make sense. And that person is like done nothing like you've done and lived their life nothing like you, and it doesn't seem to match up at all. There's some sort of belief in there. There's some sort of judgment in there that you have about yourself. So any judgment we ever have on someone else is a judgment we have on ourselves. And anything they've done, we have done. And in some way, we have done, because we're all one. Maybe we've literally done it in other lifetimes. But really what that means is we are all one, and therefore that person's crime, so to speak, is our crime on some level, because we're one with them. We're the same. We're not separate from them. So that's why it can be such powerful forgiveness work to look at where that judgment is on ourselves, because we can't just heal it by not looking at that and just saying, well, I just need to heal that judgment I have on someone else, and I need to love my brother. And just, that's it. Then that's just what I need to do. Well, guess what? You didn't actually put yourself in that healing process. You have to be part of that process yourself. So you have to be able to, that's why it's called self-forgiveness. And forgiveness, the process of forgiveness, is a journey of self-forgiveness, period. We don't have to make the initial goal to forgive our brother. Not nobody, but most people don't know how to do that. It's too hard for human beings to just forgive someone else directly for something bad they did. It just doesn't work that way. It's not that easy for humans to do that. And so that's why the process of self-forgiveness is much, much more effective in ultimately forgiving our brother, because in order to do that, the only way we forgive our brother is if we have forgiven ourselves first. So we can do that with anything, and we don't have to have the other person involved. 9 times out of 10, they're not going to be involved. There's someone in our past, or if they're still in our lives, they are still making those same choices that are hurtful to us. So it's not realistic to wait for someone to start making better choices and kinder choices with us to forgive them. The forgiveness is never based on the external conditions. It's never based on a conditional outcome. Again, that's ego. That's saying, well, I can forgive this person if they say they're sorry and don't do that again. Okay. You think that if that person says they're sorry and doesn't do that again, that you will forgive them. You think that. But that's not actually how it works, because if they do that again, you're going to feel hurt again. And so that person doesn't have to be involved in the process for forgiveness to occur, for acceptance to occur, for the healing to occur, and for us to be able to let go of whatever pain and suffering we've been enduring because of these experiences we've had with others. And so that, again, that's why it's self-forgiveness. That's what self-acceptance is. It's a journey with myself. And I know it does work this way because, one, Michael Singer is talking about it in this book I'm reading. 2, we've been in a pandemic for 1.5 years. I have done more self-forgiveness work. Well, let's say it this way. I've done more forgiveness work with myself and people in my life in the last 1.5 years without any of those people being involved in my life. Well, some of them were involved in the sense of communicating with them and so, but it's been me. My point is, it's been me doing that work with myself at home by myself, in my own heart, in my own mind, in my own body, looking at that stuff, looking at the judgments I have of them, and looking at where those judgments are of myself, where I'm feeling that in my body. What are those beliefs I'm holding? And asking myself, are those beliefs really true? And is this serving me? And, can I offer up what is not serving me to God, to my higher power, to the universe, to heal it and take it from me? Because I don't know how to do it on my own. Yet it's happened while I've been on my own the last 1.5 years, mostly living alone and not doing, it's not like I've been having like long conversations with the people that have wronged me and things like that. Like, no, that's not been happening. But I have done forgiveness work with them. I have forgiven them. I feel free from that stuff. And so I must have done it somehow, because it's a real feeling of freedom. It's not just like, oh, I don't have to deal with those things or those people anymore. No, I'm free of it because I've done the work within myself to accept how I felt about it and accept that meaning I made of it. That was me doing that work with myself, and being gentle and compassionate towards myself, to give myself a better life that I deserve and that I am worthy of. And so that's how it's done. And if anyone thinks that I'm missing something, please tell me, because I would love to hear what I might be missing. I'm open. I'm a happy learner, and I would love feedback on it. But yeah, I know this process works, and the people in my life have seen it. My friend was just telling me yesterday, even from 6 months ago, Kel, you are a different person. And I knew that, and I felt that way. But it's one thing to feel that way, and it's another thing for other people in your life to see that and tell you that and confirm that, like, yeah, you are a different person. You are showing up differently. You have less judgments, less fears. You love yourself more. It's clear, it's obvious, and your life is a reflection of it, because whatever difficulties and challenges keep arising in your life, because I don't have freedom because I've like shut myself off from the world this last year and a half or ever. I have freedom because I still am part of the world. I still go out, I still socialize, I still interact with the world. I see clients every day. I'm still a part of the world. And so challenging things, stressful relationships, situations still happen to me, just like everybody else. I have freedom because when those things happen to me, whether they're long-term past things or recent past things that have just happened and been stressful, I am doing this process that I'm talking about. And the result is that I love myself and I accept what has happened as part of my healing journey. And I don't let it have power over my life, over my happiness, over my existence anymore. It doesn't have power over me anymore. So something can happen, and I can sometimes forgive it immediately and just let it go. And I don't get all in a tizzy about it. And that's how I know that I'm a different person, because I could tell you that wasn't happening before. It was more like how my ego was operating a day and a half ago. Like, it was more like that, but like all the time, right? So what happened with my ego a day and a half ago was a wonderful opportunity that I'm so grateful for, because I have something to work with here. I have some rich, great triggers to work with here, to let this go. And I can see the truth in it. And I can see the truth and the love in the other people involved in this challenge, this problem I'm perceiving. And I can let it go because I can see the truth. And so when that stuff happens, it doesn't turn into this big, unsurmountable trauma, right? And I get chills saying that right now, because that's how it happened in the past, is something would happen and it would be this enormous trauma that would impact my life for years. And most of those big T traumas for me were actually physical illness experiences. And for me, I had to go through a lot of pain and suffering in my body and emotionally to heal from that trauma. And I would like to think if something happens to my body again physically like that, that I can use these tools in this process for the big things too, and not just for all the little things that have happened every day to challenge me. In the last several years, the things have been easier. But again, it's not, they're not easier because the big bad things aren't happening in the last 5 years. That's not why my life is easier and why I'm happier and at peace. It's because I'm doing this work with all the little stuff that adds up. All that little stuff could have caused me to be feel really victimized by my life. You know, it can have that effect for anyone, but it hasn't. And so it goes the other way too, where if something really big T trauma happens, it doesn't have to actually turn into a big T trauma. We are more resilient than that. Let's give ourselves some more credit than that. You know, if something, I mean, look around, like, you know, these fires and natural disasters and COVID, and people are experiencing intense loss in their lives, with relationships, with marriages, you know, death, like everything. And people still go on. Like, we are so resilient through our pain. Resilience isn't just about like when the pain ends and I'm like, oh, I'm okay now. Like, resilience is the process of feeling the pain and like not avoiding it. So looking at it and not just like trying to push it off constantly. Okay, we do that sometimes. That's okay to avoid it sometimes. I avoid things just like everybody else. I watch my Netflix and I do my thing, and then I come back to the reality of my ego and I think, oh, this is still here for me to look at. I can't avoid it forever, so I might as well look at it. What else am I going to do? There's no other choice for me at this point in my life. And this is the difference, I think, for people who are on this different path than the people sleeping, is that this is not a choice for us. It is a choice. It always is a choice for us. But in the sense of, this is not, I am absolutely certain that I will never make the choice to go back asleep. I couldn't possibly. Once you are awake to that certain level, you cannot go back, because you see your life. Like, I see my life, how I operated 5 years ago, and I'm like, wow, she was like, oh, I love her so much, but boy, was she like a hot mess. Like, her life was a mess, and anybody that knows me well would not disagree with me. They're like, yep, Kel, you were a walking nightmare. And so we don't, we're not going to go back to that place unless we choose to. And when we get to a certain point, and this is what has happened to me in this process, and I can see this and reflect back on it now. When we get to that certain point, we cannot possibly, we're not willing, I should say it this way, we're not willing to make that choice anymore and do things like we used to do. Okay, it doesn't mean we're not going to have challenges. It doesn't mean we're not going to revert back and listen to our ego, you know, a lot of the time. Like, yeah, those things happen, but there's a deeper level of knowing and holding the truth in my heart now, where other things, the false, the illusion-based things, the fear-based way of operating that I used to live in 24/7, it doesn't have space anymore in my heart. Like there's just no space for it. And I saw this playing out because yesterday I was like reading this long text response to me texting someone about this whole thing that my ego was going nuts about the last day and a half. And I was like, I knew what I wanted to write back. And I was like, it was on repeat over and over in my head forever. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to text back. I'm not going to respond yet. And I didn't respond like the whole day. And I went through a process. I did meditation. I talked to a friend about it. And I sat and I reflected on it a lot. I wrote it. I wrote out what I wanted to say, and I rewrote it. I reset it in my head over and over and over and over and over, literally all day. I really was like focused on doing this. And by the end of the day, I didn't need to say any of it. It didn't need to be said, because all I needed to say was something loving. And that's what I did. And it was so easy. And so I think I'll end with that. So I know that this process works because I got to do it yesterday. And I'm so grateful. So I'm going to continue doing it because I'm sure that stuff and other stuff will come up every day. So thank you, everyone. This was fun today. Very excited to be here once
Thank
again.
you so much, Kel Lash. So grateful for you. And I love that book. I have it on Audible and I play it quite frequently, actually, because it's so good. Michael Singer is my hero.
It's so good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yay.
Thank you, Kel. And we will see you again next week.
All right. Thanks, Lynn.